I remember all the way back when I started playing Planet Coaster. I just started to get the hang of how to make decent coasters. They were fairly realistic, smooth, but also extremely plain. But now, 5 or something years later, I can confidently say that they're at least better than decent. I mean, you could decide for yourself whether or not you think they're good, but at the end of the day, I don't care. I'm doing this video anyways. So yeah, here are 5 of the most useful tips that I can think of with over 1000 hours in these games. When it comes to improving your coasters, that is. I also have a little bonus tip at the very end, and it's something that I've just realized that has had a huge impact on the way that I make my coasters. I guess that makes it 6. I guess I should have been calling it 6 tips. You know, I thought I would bring up 5 main ones and then the next one, but that is just 6. The thumbnail. Firstly, we got the Stone of Unique Utility. It is what makes your coaster memorable. If you think about the real-life coasters that are regarded as some of the best, there are usually one or a couple of elements that instantly come to mind. It might be different ones for everyone, but having some elements that are unique to your ride can be really powerful and make sure that it doesn't feel plain or boring. This might seem really obvious, but I was stuck making like simple girls flowers for I don't know how long. By the way, this tip doesn't really apply if you're making some realistic coasters that are typically really plain, like a boomerang or something like that. This tip is more just if you want to make an interesting and maybe a bit more experimental coaster. And these elements that I'm talking about can really be anything from a tall vertical loop to a roll out of the station, or something that you just can't give a name to. Secondly, we have the Stone of Contrastility. If you're looking for the simplest formula to creating an interesting layout, then this might be as close as you can get. Because the number one flaw that I see in my old designs, and I suspect in many other people's creations as well, is that they feel very monotone. The intensity feels the same throughout pretty much the entire layout, of course disregarding the occasional neck-snapping turn into the station. But a simple way of fixing this, and something that I've tried to focus more on in my later creations, is to add more contrast or variety in the speed, forces, elements and so on. So instead of having a big camelback into a big 0G roll, you can have it go into a fast low to the ground roll to make the flow feel much nicer. This of course, as I said before, depends on the coaster type. If you're making a realistic B&M Hyper, then there is nothing wrong with a bunch of back-to-back airtime hills. But, I mean, it is still pretty boring to watch. Anyways, next up is the Stone of Planetility. You might have heard me mention this tip before, like in my first ever video with a voiceover. The first step in this process is to use terrain paint to create a rough layout of the coaster that hurt. That really hurt. Either way, where was I? Yeah, it can without a doubt be difficult to know where to go while you're building your coaster, and this can often be causing it to feel pretty plain or just a bit off. At least in my old coasters, you could kind of feel the uncertainty in the elements. So a method that I like to use to prevent this from happening is to draw out the layout beforehand. I do this with terrain paint, but there is nothing wrong with doing it on paper or anything else that works for you. But just the speed in which you can make changes helps so much with planning out your rough layout and getting it to a point where you feel happy without spending too much time making minor adjustments and getting lost in the details. So yeah, I can definitely see this one being something that works really well for some and not at all for others, so just try it out yourself. I really like it and it helped me a lot. But now we're onto the Stone of Referenceability. Probably the most straightforward one out of all of these, but also by far one of the most important ones if you want to improve your coasters really fast. It is simply as to use a reference from real-life coasters you like. For example, this coaster that I've been showing throughout the video is one that I made with all of these tips in mind, and it has a lot of inspired parts from the Mach multi-launch coaster Helix, with everything from the drop out of the station leading into a roll to the massive pretzel loop. Another example is this coaster that I made in my latest video, which has this part really inspired by Hakuge. Taking inspiration from real life coasters is simply a great way of improving fast and something that I do all the time. So now we're on to the fifth stone, the Stone of In-Between-Utility. Yeah, that is the best thing I could come up with. This is about the parts in between each big element, and it's kind of hard to give any tricks or rules for this since everyone has their own style, so instead I'm just going to avoid that and show some examples. So here we have a coaster with some holes in it, and I'm just going to show you some ways that I would go about completing it, and hopefully give you some inspiration. The transitional parts, if that's even a word, are really important for getting your coasters to the next level, and also something that I neglected and probably many others do. So for this part, instead of just making a simple turn, you can implement a slight outward spanking segment, or maybe even an inversion to make the flow much nicer. And now onto the second area, which is much longer and much more open for possibilities to give your coaster some character. Maybe add a snappy turn into a stall or a roll into some bunny hills. Simply put, just try to make something interesting. I can promise you that this will make your coaster much better. Now we're on to the sixth and final advice to becoming a pro, or at least slightly better than you were before. Hopefully. It is the stone of don't focus too much on hyperrealism, have fun with your designs and experiment with unusual concepts. Utility. Man, if there was one thing that I wish I did earlier, then this is it. Even if you're only into making ultra mega giga hyper-realistic coasters, then I'd still recommend doing this. Experimenting with unusual designs for coasters every now and then can open up your creativity a ton, and it was something that I simply wasn't doing. I was stuck in my comfort zone with half-decent, somewhat realistic coasters for so long, and I feel like a lot of people can relate with that. So if there's one thing to take from this video, then this would be it. Be creative with your designs and try new things. Just because it isn't super realistic does not mean it is bad. It in most cases just makes your coaster more interesting. After all, it is just a game. But yeah, that is about it. I appreciate you as always, and I'll see you again in the next video. Since you're still here, well, firstly I want to say thank you, but I also just quickly wanted to talk about this video and some other stuff as well. I hope I've managed to collect some genuinely helpful advice. I've certainly done my best, and I think that many of these tips can be applied to pretty much anything that is creative. So yeah, I hope it's been useful to some of you, at least. Please leave a comment on your thoughts about them down below. But there's one more thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is the fact that this will probably be my final Planet Coaster video, at least for a while. There will be a full video about this change on the channel coming pretty soon, for those who care, where I explain a bit more in depth. But that is why I decided to make this video where I collect everything that I've learned over the years. I'll still be uploading, but I'll just experiment a bit more. I've never really done that before when it comes to the videos that I make, so yeah, I guess I might as well follow my own advice.